But now on to Benelux Tour Stage 4, which was a sprint stage. There wasn't too much wind today from Alta to Ardoi, 167 Ks, got a golden kilometre, 6 Ks from the finish, 2 intermediate sprints before that. It's near Benji's house, apparently, like 15, 20 Ks away. And I just want to talk about the train. Well, first, 50 coverage started 50 Ks, Benji. We saw attacks from, who's that Balwaza guy? The young guy. Pretty strong.
Yep.
I mean, he's pretty good, but we just saw like loads of attacks from him. Occasionally, Taco tried to get involved. Bisseka's leading GC for Education First. They were controlling things. Did any break ever really get any traction?
Well, at the start of the stage, we had a 3-man breakaway with Arjen Livens and 2 other people. And those 2 other people are the following riders in the peloton: Thomas Sprengers and Sam Bewley. And that break wasn't ahead for too long. Like, they were caught up after, I think, 40, 50 kilometers into the stage already. So that means that the tempo did go up at a certain point. And it's like weird because the stage had nothing that like indicates that something was going to go wrong or something, or a section that is very dangerous in the last 40 kilometers. But it felt like the entire stage, everybody was nervous. And as a consequence, you don't have a breakaway. And you've got the likes of Herhots then making the move, like you mentioned, and the peloton is just straight up trying to close it down immediately. And that shows that either they were afraid or something, or at that point in the race, they were already thinking about potential bonus seconds at the golden kilometer. But I doubt that, because on paper, it's only 9 seconds. And the way the riders have been riding today at the front of the peloton was a bit hard for just the golden kilometer, to be honest. Perhaps something happened before the broadcast started. Perhaps a zone with echelons or something where people expected echelons, but it didn't happen, but just didn't feel like it. And yeah, it was eventually Jumbo that was doing a lot of work, the Koenig doing a lot of work. So all the teams of the sprinters really, and Alpecin as well, pacing in the peloton after Merlier had his first win already this week. So that's when you know that it smells like a sprint stage, it looks like a sprint stage, it's probably a sprint stage.
And Dries de Bont was marking everything as well. Any dangerous moves that went, he'd go, and then he'd sit on, and then everyone get demotivated. And so that he was doing a good job in a defensive role too. And so pretty dangerous run-in, to be honest. They're going like 60 Ks plus. The road narrows to a one-way road, it looks like to me. It's like 5 riders wide with 6 Ks to go. And it's so narrow that Bahrain, who've taken the front of the peloton with Seberg and Bauhaus, they don't actually have to then keep pacing hard because no one can move up if they ride slower. So they've just gone to the front, it's parked up there, excellent for them. It eventually opens up a bit, and we see Bora pacing for Sagan. Lotto have, they got one rider at the front pacing in the like 3Ks, 2Ks to go, but then Du Bois just behind with Ewan in a pocket. And it's just, I think we got to talk about the Lotto lead-out train, Benji. What's the point in having the quickest man in a straight line in the world or out of a corner with 150 meters to go if they're constantly putting him in bad situations? A small guy as well who, when Volscheid would come over to the barriers, there's not much he can do to stop himself getting pinched either.
Yes, certainly. In this final section, you have basically Lotto coming to the front with 2 riders early on before the last kilometer as well, doing a bit of pacing, and then Du Bois is the only rider left to help out Ewan. And we see him moving up with Ewan on the left side of the road, and he puts him ahead of Merlier, but way open in the wind with no space that he can latch onto. So there's a train on the right of him, so you can't just say to a rider in there, well, mate, get out of the way. Ewan has to sit there. That's not going to happen. So you got to find a wheel to latch onto or a place outside of the wind to have your sprinter at. And Du Bois pulls him towards a friend and basically leaves him alone just ahead of Merlier, straight up in the wind. So I don't know, it felt like it was a bit of a bad position, and Ewan realized that. He looks back and he tries to find a position behind him. So that's when he loses momentum as well, because he has to move back and try and find a wheel to latch onto there. And when Merlier already has his wheel, you have to try and figure out how to get into the wheel of the likes of a Merlier. And he gets into the wheel of Merlier for a bit, but then eventually you lose it a bit because Walscheid indeed comes from the right side of the road and is being forced. So it's not that Walscheid tried to push him in the barrier. He was being forced to the left side of the road, and he had nowhere really to go. And eventually Ewan was the one that was the rider most on the left that had to brake because otherwise he would most likely would have landed in the barrier. So he had to brake, lose momentum again, and he's one spot further. And this all comes down to the fact that he wasn't positioned well at the first place. He wasn't placed well by his lead out there, but he also doesn't have anyone that can bring him towards the front anymore from this point onwards. And if you're in that position with, I don't know, 500 meters to go, which is basically 10 for 12 position in the sprint, a good 10 meters behind the fast sprinter, it's going to be very hard to get past all those riders in a very messy sprint that is Ardøya.
And you're basically putting up against Pedersen, Merlier, Valscheid, and he's first trying to take the wheel of Sturven off Pedersen, I think, then Pedersen's wheel of Merlier. Like, these guys are like 25 kilos, 20 kilos heavier than him, probably. And it's just not... You know who did a good lead up, Benji? And who was furious at his sprinter afterwards, who actually slid onto Merlier's wheel, then got pinched by Sagan? Heinrich Hausler. Hausler brought a non-existent Bauhaus up the left-hand side to Pedersen's wheel with about 400 meters to go. He pulls off, looks behind, and you can see in the front-on shot, he raises his hand, he's like, what the fuck? Where is Bauhaus? And sees him like behind Sagan. You should see, I'll take a screenshot. He sees Bauhaus like behind Sagan. I know, like, no chance of winning. I think Pedersen got a good lead out once again. I was also surprised that he waited so long to sprint out of that corner with, I think, 200 meters to go. He waited again, and a long form sprinter. He gets out of the wheel of, I think, is it Van Poppel, the Intermarché rider. He drifts far to the right, and I sort of love a bit of karma sometimes, Benji, when a rider, he's like swung all the way across the side of the road. No one, these guys top level, none of them know how to sprint in straight lines. Unbelievable. And he opens up a gap on the barrier, which Merlier says, thank you very much, slides straight through to the line and nails Pedersen, but he's also like, I'm going to drift across to the right to shut off my back wheel to Van Poppel as well. So Merlier takes his second sprint. We've talked a lot about trains there. I think Alpecin just keep Merlier at the front in the top 5-6 wheels, just keeping him in touch, in position, and he can do the rest. Pedersen got a good lead out again, and I think the lead outs made a huge difference today with that left-hand bend with 200 meters to go, because if you were tight and behind on the barrier like Ewan, you just got squeezed. So the final top 10, Merlier, Pedersen, Van Poppel, Sagan, Laporte, Bauhaus, Gaviria, Volscheid. Forgot Groenewegen was here, Benji. Do you know what happened with him? He came ninth.
Kia was just not well positioned and tried to move through at the end, but didn't seem like he had the power to get past too many people there, so just wasn't good enough, I think.
Right, so GC is still, I think, Benelux Tour usually takes about 6 hours to send out the revised GC, but I think it's still Biziger leading ahead of stage 5 tomorrow from Reims to Bilsen, which is more of a classic stage. We have some little ponds at the end, the Lettenberg, Heiberg, Slingerberg are quite steep. Where's this, Benji? Tell us where this is.
I think this is in Belgium.
Is Reims in Belgium?
I don't know. My geography class was like 10 years ago. I think this is in Belgium. I think Belgium as well. So on paper, this is in Belgium. Probably like Flemish Ardennes section, and perhaps more in the Vlaams-Brabant region of Belgium. But I have no clue, actually. Like, I'm so bad when it comes to the geography in my own country. It's kind of sad.
Well, Benji only knows West Flams places, apparently. Does it go into... does this race go into Luxembourg at any point? It must.
It has never done in the history of the Benelux Tour, I think.
You'd know it must do. It must be. It's called the Benelux Tour.
Well, it doesn't matter. I don't remember any Benelux Tour that went to Luxembourg. Could be wrong, but if anyone knows a Benelux Tour that went to Luxembourg, count it in the description and the comments.
I guess this is the first year it's called Benelux. It was previously called Bingo Bongo and still remains that in my heart. But yeah, interesting. I just want to go back to touch on the Ewan thing, Benji. They signed Rudiger Zelig next year for Lotto Soudal, and 32 years old, 2-year deal. He was the last man for Ackermann for a long time, and he was still this year. And I think not the best in that role. Like, fine, but I don't think Zelig is the solution. I may be wrong. Maybe they're looking for when Roger Kluger, when Kluger was at his peak, when he was a bit younger for Caleb Ewan, they're trying to get that big 192 centimeter guy, or tall guy, like, to replace him. But I think I'm worried for Caleb Ewan next year, Benji. I think maybe Du Bois is going to have to step up. I mean, what are you seeing there? You're just seeing at that moment when Du Bois flicks Ewan, the opposite. Well, why not just sign Hausler? I honestly think Hausler has been doing good lead-outs this year.
Yeah, I think so as well. But I think my main issue that I see today is that the difference between Merlier and Ewan is indeed that Merlier is a much bigger rider. He can try and move people by shouldering next to them. For example, at a certain point in the last kilometer and a half, Merlier has to move through two riders. I think it's a Quebecer rider on the right side of him, and he has the weight to lean to the right and push the Quebecer rider out of the way. Now, it's not the most clean thing to do so with your head like he did, but he did do it, and he moved that Quebecer rider out of the way, and that was his way to move into a good position for the sprint. If you're not able to do that, then you can't move up. And Caleb Ewan can't do that because he's so fucking tiny. That is no offense included. But
Yeah, he tries. He does his best. He like when Volscheid pinched him, Ewan put his head on him and his shoulder, but
yeah,
Volscheid like literally didn't notice or care.
yep.
So yeah, that's what it is for Ewan. I think he needs a little bit more support. But yeah, it's interesting. Sprints Merlier keeps cleaning up, and World Championships. I still think Benji Wout lead out Merlier. It's a Dubsky for Belgium, even though I'm the only person that thinks that. And then Pedersen comes around and wins. Mercu does reverse lead out and wins. That's my dream. Anyway, we're off track here. Thanks for listening to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast on this stacked 3 World Tour race Thursday. Thanks to Cole for supporting the podcast, and we'll see you with all these races recapped again tomorrow. Ciao.